YZZ News at 9.
Earlier today, I spoke with U.S. Congresswoman Sherry Bustos. We talked health care and the 2020 election. Take a look. I want to talk health care. You just helped pass a bill that would protect those with pre-existing conditions. And the bill also seeks to fight big pharma by lowering costs of drugs, specifically by making pay-for-delay agreements illegal. Can you tell me about that and how that'll help bring costs down?
Well, we actually had a momentous day in the U.S. House of Representatives late last week in that we've actually passed 7 bills altogether. And they do all sorts of things. You just laid out a couple of those where literally in the first year, because of this piece of legislation that we passed, prescription drug prices could go down by half. And over the course of 5 years, prescription drug prices could go down by 80%. Now, these are generic drugs that will be able to get to the market faster as a result of what we passed. Now, I want to manage expectations. I always think that that's important. And while we passed this in the House in bipartisan fashion, the Senate now would have to take this up and pass it in order for us to send something to the President to be signed into law. And unfortunately, Mitch McConnell is on this kick calling himself the Grim Reaper. And why he calls himself that is he's saying that the legislation that we pass, even though it's bipartisan and literally should not even have a Democrat label or Republican label alongside, he's saying that they're going to go to the graveyard. And so that's the real problem that we're facing right now. We can pass all the great legislation we possibly can, but we've got to have a willing partner over in the Senate, and Mitch McConnell has not been a willing partner, frankly.
Another important piece when it comes to health care is taking care of our veterans, especially those who live in rural areas. Now, I understand you just passed legislation, a funding bill that would help provide access to health care for these veterans. How will it connect them to better care?
Well, so I am pretty lucky this session of Congress in that I have been appointed to the Powerful Appropriations Committee, which means that literally every cent of federal government spending goes through the Appropriations Committee. And I'm on these key subcommittees, including the Labor Subcommittee, Health and Human Services, Veterans, Military Construction, Defense. So the vast majority of the federal funding goes through those subcommittees on which I serve. As it pertains to veterans, we actually, out of our office, my office, we wrote legislation to expand telemedicine, which is good for rural America, and then specifically, and I can tell you this came from veterans who I heard from in the Peoria region, saying that when they have to go to the VA hospital, transportation can be an issue. So if you look at a congressional district like I'm lucky enough to serve, we have 14 counties. It's 7,000 square miles, and if you have an ailment, let's say you are going through cancer treatment, and you've got to go to the VA hospital in Danville, then you've got to figure out if you don't have a loved one who can take you there, transportation could be a problem. So we introduced legislation that did pass as part of this that will allow for a pilot program to look at how are we going to get our veterans to the appointments that they need, whether it's at the clinics or whether it's the VA hospitals.
Switching gears here, it's a crowded field in terms of Democratic candidates for the 2020 election, and more importantly, a very diverse group, from Bernie Sanders, who's a self-described Democratic socialist, to Biden and Klobuchar, who are more moderate. Where do you think voters fall on the spectrum, and what do you think will resonate with them?
I think it's way too early to predict anything at this point, but I can tell you what I'm looking for. Without offering a formal endorsement of any sort, but what I'm looking for is for the presidential nominee out of the Democratic Party to be someone who understands regions like ours. You know, we're in central Illinois, and the congressional district I serve covers the entire northwest corner of the state of Illinois. I want to make sure whoever the nominee is understands our part of the country. And while we have Peoria and the Quad Cities and Rockford are somewhat bigger towns, we literally have 60% of the towns in our congressional district that have 1,000 people or fewer. And we have 85% of our towns in our congressional district that are 5,000 people or fewer. So when you think about that, you know, we're just people, we don't want to be left behind. We want to make sure that who's ever serving the White House understands farm country, understands companies like Caterpillar, and the people who go to work and build heavy machinery every day. I just want people to make sure that they, first of all, understand us, and then they're going to fight for us once they're in the White House.
Lastly, I know it is very early, as you just mentioned, but is there a candidate you're backing for 2020?
There is not one I am backing for 2020 at this point. I'll tell you what, check in with me when it gets a little bit closer. Obviously, as a member of Congress, I will be going to the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee next year. I will be a delegate, and I obviously will be asked to cast my vote if it gets to that ballot for one of the candidates. I hope that we can make the decision among Democratic voters leading up to that convention, so it's not a contentious convention in Milwaukee. But you know, it is such an unknown situation right now when we've got 23 candidates who are vying for the presidency. I think it's anybody's guess at this point how that will end up looking.
Congresswoman Bustos, thank you.